You're such an angel, Jessica. My mother beamed, her voice thick with admiration. We have no idea what we'd do without you. I remained silent, my fork hovering just above my plate. Across from me, Jessica sat with that ever-present, self-satisfied smile, effortlessly soaking in the praise. She didn't even glance in my direction, as if she already knew I wouldn't speak up. As if I couldn't. My name is Emily Carter. I am 27 years old, an elementary school teacher, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one holding this family together in the background. But no one ever seems to notice. My older sister, Jessica, has always been the star, the one everyone gravitates toward, effortlessly charming and endlessly admired. And me? I'm the reliable one. The one who steps in when things fall apart. For years, I have quietly sent money to help my parents with their medical bills, making sacrifices while Jessica basks in the credit. But recently, something inside me shifted. I decided I was done. The fallout began soon after. I remember the exact moment I made my choice. There was no dramatic declaration, no big announcement. I had been sitting alone in my tiny apartment, staring at my nearly depleted bank account after paying rent, and suddenly, I felt something inside me snap. I simply couldn't keep doing this, barely making ends meet while Jessica played the hero. So, I stopped. At first, nothing happened. Weeks passed in silence, and I wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had figured it out. That Jessica wasn't actually covering the bills as they believed. But then, the phone calls started. My mother asked why certain payments were delayed. My father casually mentioned overdue notices arriving in the mail. Through it all, Jessica remained conspicuously quiet, likely hoping no one would piece things together. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or break down in frustration. The moment everything came to a head was a Sunday afternoon. My mother's voice carried an edge of irritation when she called me. "Emily, your father's insurance payment is overdue again." Did something happen to Jessica's account? She assured us she's taking care of everything, but payments keep slipping through. My grip tightened around my phone. For the first time, I heard uncertainty creep into my mother's voice, a tiny crack in her unwavering belief in Jessica. I wanted to yell, "It's not Jessica. It has never been Jessica. It's been me all along." But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the words and replied evenly, "Maybe you should ask Jessica directly." It wasn't an outburst. It wasn't a confrontation. But it felt like a quiet rebellion, refusing to give them the easy answer, forcing them to figure it out themselves. And yet, the guilt gnawed at me. Every time my parents sounded worried or confused, I felt it creeping in, even though deep down, I knew I wasn't the one responsible. As time passed, the situation continued to unravel. My mother's calls became more frequent, her voice carrying a strain I wasn't used to hearing. Jessica says she's trying to handle it, but the hospital keeps sending past due notices, she sighed one evening. Meanwhile, Jessica's Instagram told a very different story, posts of rooftop cocktails, designer shopping bags, expensive skincare unboxings. She was still playing the role of someone who had everything under control while our parents struggled. Then came the inevitable family dinner. My mother insisted on gathering us all together to sort things out, which really meant giving Jessica the floor to spin her story while I sat in silence. That's how these things always went. But this time, something shifted. My father, typically the quiet observer, turned to Jessica, his expression serious. "You've been handling this for months, Jessica. What's going on? Why are the payments falling behind?" The color drained from her face. For the first time, I saw her confidence falter. She stammered, scrambling for an excuse, something about unexpected expenses and a temporary setback, but it was clear she hadn't anticipated this moment. My mother was quick to jump to her defense. "She's doing the best she can, William," she snapped before turning toward me. "And Emily, maybe it's time you stepped up and helped for once. You've done nothing for us as it is." The word struck me like a slap, leaving me momentarily breathless. A sharp ache spread through my chest, fueled by the sheer injustice of it all. I looked at Jessica, hoping perhaps foolishly, that she would meet my gaze. But she didn't. Instead, she remained eerily still, avoiding my eyes completely. My mother, however, had no hesitation in locking onto me, her expression filled with disappointment. And, of course, it was aimed at me. My father, as always, remained silent. That was the moment I realized the awful truth. They truly believed it. In their eyes, Jessica had carried this burden all along, while I was nothing more than a bystander, selfish and absent. My hands trembled as I forced myself to speak. That's not true, Mom. I have been helping. I've been the one paying those bills for years. Silence settled over the room, so thick and heavy it felt suffocating. Then, with an exasperated scoff, my mother shook her head. "Emily, don't be ridiculous," she said, her tone sharp with disbelief. "Jessica is the one keeping us afloat. She's the one working hard to take care of us. And now you're trying to take credit for her sacrifices?" The accusation made my stomach twist. My fingers curled around the edge of the table, gripping it to steady myself. I turned to Jessica, expecting, hoping, for even the smallest protest, some attempt to set the record straight. But she remained frozen, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. And yet, she said nothing. Before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "That's not true, Mom. It's never been true. For 3 years, I've been sending money to cover those bills every single month. Jessica hasn't paid a dime." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. And I stopped because I was tired of being invisible while she took all the credit. Jessica's head snapped up, her face twisting in disbelief. "What is wrong with you, Emily?" she spat, her voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. "Why are you making up these lies?" She let out a breathy, incredulous laugh, shaking her head. "This is insane. I've been the one helping Mom and Dad, and now you're trying to make me look bad." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously going to sit there and pretend I'm lying?" My voice rose in frustration. "Jessica, I have bank statements. Receipts. 3 years of them. Do you want me to show everyone right now?" Jessica scoffed, an exaggerated, mocking sound. "Receipts?" she echoed, shaking her head like the very idea was laughable. "You're just bitter because Mom and Dad actually appreciate what I do for them. You've been on the sidelines while I've kept this family together, and now you want to rewrite history." "Rewrite history?" I repeated, anger flaring in my chest. "You've been stealing credit for everything I've done, Jessica. I am the one who's been sending money, month after month, while you've been blowing yours on luxury vacations and spa days." Jessica crossed her arms and shot a glance toward our mother. "See, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with exaggerated hurt. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Emily always plays the victim. She can't stand the fact that I actually help you, so now she's trying to tear me down." There it was. The perfect manipulation, perfectly delivered. But I caught it, the tiny crack in her voice. She was nervous. Then, with an almost practiced sharpness, Jessica turned back to me. "If you were really helping, Emily, why didn't you say anything for 3 years? And now, suddenly, you're bringing this up? Let me guess, it's not about the money, right? It's about the credit. Admit it. You're mad because I'm the one they think." Her words cut deep, and what made it worse? My mother nodded, arms folded tightly. "Jessica's right, Emily," she said, her voice laced with skepticism. "Why wouldn't you tell us sooner if you were really helping all this time? And now, out of nowhere, we're supposed to believe this? It feels strange, Emily. It really does." Heat burned in my cheeks as frustration surged through me. "Because I wasn't doing it for the recognition," I shot back, my voice unsteady. "I did it because I wanted to help you. I didn't think I needed to parade it around just to get validation." I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to steady my tone. "And maybe I should have spoken up sooner. But does that make it okay for Jessica to take credit for something she never did?" Jessica rolled her eyes with a dramatic sigh. "Oh, please, Emily," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "You're acting like I forced you into silence or something. And even if what you're saying is true, which, honestly, I doubt, why wait until now? Why bring it up only when it benefits you?" She leaned forward slightly, tilting her head. "You're just bitter. That's all this is. You want to make me look bad, and you don't even care how much stress this is putting on Mom and Dad." My father, who had remained mostly silent, finally shook his head. His voice was calm but questioning. Emily, it's just hard to understand why you would keep quiet for so long if this is really true. I couldn't understand it. The weight of their doubt felt suffocating, pressing down on me while Jessica sat there, exuding confidence as if she had already won. The injustice of it all made my stomach churn. I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I refused to let her control the narrative any longer. I didn't speak up because I genuinely wanted to help Mom and Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady. It was never about recognition for me. I wasn't looking for praise. I just wanted to make sure they were okay. I let my words linger before continuing, eyes locked on Jessica. But then I realized what you were doing. You weren't just allowing them to assume you were helping, you were actively taking credit for what I had sacrificed. So, I waited. I wanted to see how long you'd keep up the lie, how far you'd be willing to take it. A flicker of irritation crossed Jessica's face, but she held her ground. That's ridiculous, she snapped, her voice rising. You're telling me you sat there, quietly, for years, letting me take credit, and now you're suddenly outraged? If this was such a problem, why didn't you say something earlier? No, you waited. Until now, when you thought you could use it against me, when you thought you could humiliate me in front of everyone. I cut her off before she could twist the situation any further. I waited, I said, my tone sharp, because I wanted to see if you would ever do the right thing. If you'd have the decency to admit the truth on your own. But you never did, Jessica. You sat back and let everyone believe your story while I worked myself into exhaustion, trying to keep everything afloat. I turned to our parents, their faces a mix of hesitation and disbelief. My mother looked skeptical, while my father seemed caught between confusion and shock. This isn't what I wanted, I admitted, voice quieter now, the weight of it all pressing down on me. But I'm not going to sit here and let her rewrite history anymore. Straightening my shoulders, I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I have proof, Mom. Bank statements, payment records, 3 years' worth of them. I could pull them up right now if you wanted. I exhaled slowly. But that's not the point. I turned back to Jessica, meeting her gaze head-on. What I want is for you to finally tell the truth. Just be honest for once. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression hardening into defiance. I don't know what you're talking about, she said flatly, though I caught the slight tremor in her voice. I've been the one handling things. She scoffed. If you have proof, Emily, then show it. Otherwise, stop making up these stories just to make me look bad. Her audacity burned through me, but I refused to let her get the reaction she wanted. Why should I have to show it, Jessica? I asked, voice controlled despite my frustration. You already know the truth. And if you had even an ounce of integrity, you'd admit it instead of digging yourself deeper into this lie. A tense silence filled the space between us. My father leaned forward, his expression uncertain, while my mother still hesitated, searching my face as though she wasn't sure whether to believe me. And Jessica? She just sat there, her jaw tight, refusing to acknowledge anything. The frustration inside me reached a breaking point. I pushed my chair back, the screech of the legs against the floor cutting through the silence as I stood up. My voice shook, but I forced it to stay firm. I'm done, Jessica. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, please, Emily. Stop being so dramatic. This is ridiculous. Her dismissal stung, but I refused to let her see it. I turned to her one last time, my chest heavy with the weight of years of silence. If there's any part of you that still has a conscience, you'll tell Mom and Dad the truth. I shook my head, exhaling slowly. Until then, don't expect me to answer your calls. Don't text me. I'm done. Without looking back, I grabbed my coat and walked out, leaving them all behind. For the first time, I was choosing myself over their endless expectations. It would have been simple to prove everything. A few taps on my phone and I could have shown them the bank statements. It would have taken seconds. But that wasn't what this was about. This wasn't about proving who was right. I needed Jessica to own up to what she had done, to finally take responsibility for the years of deception. As the months passed, the silence between me and my parents grew heavier. Conversations became clipped, distant, like they no longer knew how to speak to me, or maybe they just didn't want to. I didn't blame them entirely. I had shattered the illusion they had built around Jessica, and they weren't ready to face what that meant. But it still hurt. No matter how justified my decision was, the sting of their doubt lingered. As for Jessica, I completely cut her out of my life. No texts, no calls, no interactions at all. I even skipped family gatherings where I knew she'd be, including Mom's birthday dinner. The thought of sitting across from her, pretending everything was fine while she kept up her act, was unbearable. It wasn't worth the exhaustion or the anger it stirred inside me. Instead, I focused on something I had neglected for years, my own peace. It didn't take long before the cracks in Jessica's perfect image began to show. Word spread that she was struggling financially, missed car payments, cutting back on her usual expensive outings, and even a few subtle social media posts hinting at tight budgets and unexpected expenses. It wasn't exactly a mystery why. For the first time, she was actually making the payments she had claimed to be handling all along. Part of me wondered if she had finally realized what I had been carrying for so long. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had built this illusion. Now she had to live in it. For years, I had sacrificed in silence while she took the benefits without a second thought. Watching her struggle, finally feeling the weight of the responsibility she had pretended to bear, was a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't wanted things to end up like this. But if I was being honest, this was exactly what she deserved. Then, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Jessica showed up at my door unannounced. I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, her usual flawless appearance replaced by dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her whole demeanor subdued in a way I had never seen before. For a moment, I just stared, unsure whether to let her in or send her right back down the hallway. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small, almost pleading. This wasn't the Jessica I knew, and that hesitation threw me off. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and motioned toward the couch. She sank onto it as if the weight of everything she had been carrying had finally caught up to her. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting. I'm in trouble, Emily, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. I can't keep up with everything anymore. I don't know what to do. I leaned against the wall, keeping my arms folded. My expression didn't soften. "That's not my problem, Jessica," I said flatly. She flinched at my cold tone, but I felt no guilt, not after everything she had done. "You made this bed," I continued, my voice unwavering. "Now you get to lie in it." Panic flashed in her eyes, the same kind of panic I had felt for years while scrambling to make ends meet, while she stood in the spotlight, soaking in the praise. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up, but I cut her off before she could even try to manipulate the situation. "Messed up?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "Jessica, you didn't just mess up. You lied. You let Mom and Dad believe something that wasn't true. You let me struggle while you played the role of the perfect daughter. And now what? You want me to fix it for you?" Her eyes filled with desperation as she pleaded. "Please, Emily. I just need a little help. Things are bad right now, and I don't have anyone else to turn to." She wiped at her face, her hands trembling. "I know I haven't treated you fairly, but you're my sister." I stared at her, feeling an unfamiliar mix of emotions, anger, exhaustion, and maybe even a tiny sliver of pity. "Help," I repeated, my tone sharp. "You're asking me for help? After everything?" She nodded quickly, her red-rimmed eyes searching my face for any sign of mercy. "I know I screwed up, okay? But I'm trying, Emily. I'm trying to make things right." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Make things right?" I echoed, shaking my head. "Jessica, you've been lying to my face for years. You want my help? Fine. Start by telling Mom and Dad the truth. Until you do that, I have nothing for you." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see her struggling, trying to come up with some excuse, some way to spin this in her favor. But she had nothing. She looked down, twisting her hands nervously in her lap. Then, as if grasping at one last defense, She straightened her posture, her voice turning cold again. "Look, Emily," she said, her tone defensive now. "I have been making the payments. So, technically, I'm not lying anymore. I've been handling it, just like everyone thinks I have." I felt my blood boil. "Technically?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself, Jessica?" She flinched, but I wasn't finished. "You think you're off the hook just because you finally started doing what you've pretended to do all along? You lied for years, took all the credit, and now you want to act like that never happened." Her jaw tightened. She turned away, avoiding my glare. "I'm doing my best, Emily," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to push down the overwhelming frustration bubbling inside me. "You want my help?" I asked, voice quieter now, but no less firm. "Then stop pretending. Own up to what you did. Until then, don't ask me for anything." For a moment, she just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. And this time, I wouldn't. "I never meant for it to go this far," Jessica whispered. I let out a harsh breath, barely holding back the frustration boiling inside me. That was the problem. It was always the problem with her. "You never mean for anything, Jessica," I snapped, my voice sharp. "But you're always fine letting me take the hit so you can keep your spotless reputation intact. Don't act like this is about them. This is about you. And guess what? It doesn't make up for a damn thing." My hands trembled, but I refused to let her see how much this still hurt. She looked up at me then, her own voice shaking, but still stubborn. "Okay, fine," she said, her tone laced with reluctance. "I'll tell Mom and Dad the truth. I'll admit everything." For a split second, I felt something close to relief. But then she added, "But I need your help first, Emily. Please. Just this once." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my tone flat, cold. "You're telling me you'll only think about telling the truth if I bail you out first? How convenient." Her eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "No, I swear. I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. I promise. But I'm drowning here, Emily. I just need a little help to get through this, and then I'll come clean. I swear." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. I crossed my arms, shaking my head. "Let me get this straight," I said, my words slow, deliberate. "You're willing to keep lying to Mom and Dad unless I save you first? And you expect me to believe you'll actually follow through this time?" Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, cutting her off before she could spin another excuse. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not playing this game with you anymore. If you actually want to fix this, you don't need my help. You need to tell the truth. Period." She exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples as if she could somehow think her way out of this. Then, finally, she lifted her head and met my eyes. "Fine," she said. Her voice was steadier now, more controlled. "I'll do it. I'll tell the entire family at the reunion next Saturday. Everything. I'll admit it all." Her words carried a weight I hadn't heard before. She was desperate, but she was also serious. "Will that be enough for you?" she asked hesitantly. I hesitated. An idea flickered in the back of my mind. "You're really going to confess? Everything?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. She nodded, exhaling like she had just resigned herself to something inevitable. "Yes, the whole truth. I swear." I let the silence stretch, watching her closely. Then, slowly, I nodded. "All right," I said. "If you actually stand up in front of everyone and tell them what you did, I'll give you the money on Sunday. But only if you go through with it." Jessica swallowed, hesitated for just a second, then nodded quickly. "Okay, I'll do it." Her relief was almost palpable, but I didn't soften. I didn't trust her. And I had no intention of giving her a single cent. The family reunion was already in full swing when Jessica stood up, tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her closely. I wasn't going to believe a single word until I actually heard it come out of her mouth. She cleared her throat, her hands gripping the back of her chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I have something I need to say. The usual hum of conversation died down as curious glances turned in her direction. Mom's eyes lit up with expectation, while Dad furrowed his brows, already sensing something was off. Jessica swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and finally spoke. For the past few years, everyone has believed I was the one helping Mom and Dad with their bills, she said, her voice unsteady. But that wasn't true. It wasn't me. A heavy silence settled over the room. It was Emily. The words rang out, hanging in the air like a crack of thunder. I barely moved as I watched the shock ripple through the room. Mom blinked, her mouth opening and closing, like she was struggling to process what she had just heard. My father was the first to find his voice. "Wait, what are you saying, Jessica?" he asked, his tone thick with disbelief. "I'm saying that Emily was the one sending the money," Jessica admitted, her voice cracking. "And I let you think it was me." I lied. The tension in her shoulders collapsed as if the weight of her own deception had finally crushed her. "I'm sorry." Mom covered her mouth, her face crumpling as tears welled in her eyes. She turned to me, her voice breaking. "Emily, we didn't believe you. We called you a liar." She shook her head, the guilt evident in her expression. "I am so sorry. How could we not see it?" Dad stood, his face etched with regret as he crossed the room to me. "Emily," he said, his voice heavy. "I don't even know what to say. We were wrong about everything. You didn't deserve any of this." Their apologies were sincere. I could feel it. And yet, they didn't bring the relief I had expected. I had waited years to hear these words. I had imagined this moment so many times, thinking it would feel like a victory. But standing there, listening to them, all I felt was tired. I hadn't done this for them. I had done it for me. My mother reached for my arm, her voice shaking with emotion. "Emily, we were so blind. I don't understand how we didn't see it. How could we have been so unfair to you?" My father stood beside her, nodding, his face heavy with guilt. "We're truly sorry, Emily. You've done so much for us and we let you down. I don't know how we can ever make it right, but I hope you'll give us the chance to try." Their remorse was raw, almost overwhelming. For so long, my silence had shielded them from the truth. Letting them believe Jessica's lies had cost me more than I ever realized. "I appreciate your apology," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But this isn't something that can be fixed overnight. I need time, and I need space. Right now, I need to focus on myself." My mother wiped her tears, nodding quickly. "We understand, sweetheart. Just, please don't shut us out. We want to do better." I gave her a small, tired smile, but my eyes drifted toward Jessica. She hadn't moved. Her head hung low, hands clasped together, as if she were bracing for impact. I didn't say a word to her. Instead, I turned, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the house, leaving the weight of the past behind me. For the first time in years, I was choosing me. I didn't look back. I didn't spare Jessica a second glance. Whatever happened between her and my parents from here on out, that wasn't my problem anymore. For once, I wasn't going to carry their burdens on my shoulders. The following afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. I didn't need to open it to know what it was about. Still, when I glanced at the screen, the words stared back at me, calculated and transactional. "I told them the truth, Emily. Now can you send me the money we talked about?" I exhaled slowly, a bitter amusement creeping into my chest. Not even 24 hours had passed. She wasted no time. I wasn't surprised. But something about it still hit me, whether it was anger, disappointment, or something else entirely, I wasn't sure. I already knew exactly how I would respond. "Meet me at Mom and Dad's house. Let's talk there." No further explanation. No hint of what was coming. By the time Jessica arrived, I was already seated in the living room with our parents. The tension in the air was thick, unspoken words hanging between us. Mom and Dad sat stiffly, their faces a mixture of sadness and disappointment. When Jessica stepped inside, her usual confidence faltered. Her gaze darted between us, already sensing something was off. Her voice wavered. "What's going on?" I didn't bother with pretense. Instead, I held up my phone, the screen glowing with the message she had sent me. I thought it was time Mom and Dad saw this, I said evenly. Jessica's face drained of color as she read the text, the undeniable proof of her motives. So they'd know the only reason you finally told the truth yesterday was because you wanted something from me. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face flushed with anger. My father let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples as he processed the betrayal. I met Jessica's stunned gaze, my voice unwavering. I'm not giving you the money, Jessica. She flinched, but I continued. Telling the truth wasn't supposed to be a bargaining chip. It was something you should have done a long time ago, not because you needed something from me, but because it was the right thing to do. I took a breath. And I'm not going to reward you for doing the bare minimum after years of lies. I stood, grabbing my bag, watching as the realization finally hit her. Her lips parted, her face crumbling as true panic set in. She dropped to her knees, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, Emily, she sobbed, gripping my arm desperately. I'm begging you. I don't know what else to do. I stared down at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. I pulled my arm free, my voice cold, detached. That's not my problem anymore, Jessica. Her cries followed me as I walked out of the house, but for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel responsible. Instead, I felt light. Like I had finally let go of something that had been weighing me down for far too long. As I stepped into the cool afternoon air, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. Just freedom. For once, I wasn't the one cleaning up the mess. It was time to focus on my own life, leaving Jessica and the past exactly where they belonged. Behind me.